Russia's labor capital is almost collapsing due to the invasion of Ukraine. Kremlin leader Vladimir Putin's constant recruitment of additional soldiers for the Russian army has left almost no one to work in the country. In 2022, Putin declared partial mobilization and called 300,000 people to the Russian army. This decision had sunk the Russian economy, which was already at rock bottom. Now it is rumored that Putin is again in a new mobilization operation involving 300,000 people. Unnamed sources in the Russian president's administration and the defense ministry confirm this. They suggest that this new wave of mobilization could soon be sent to Ukraine. The mobilized men will probably consist of reservists and current soldiers, who will be persuaded to sign new contracts when their current terms expire. One of the reasons for the need for such measures is the lack of volunteers to fight. An employee of the military contracting center in Moscow told Verska that the number of those willing to go to war is falling. Indeed, since October 2023, the flow of people had fallen sharply. Previously, Russian volunteer recruitment centers received several hundred people a day. At times, this number was said to have reached 500, 600. Now, these centers were receiving 20, 30 new recruits a day. However, in order to fill this gap, the Kremlin has adopted forced conscription of volunteers, providing the Russian army with additional military power. This coercive and repressive system, which has been in place since 2022, has upset Russia's labor and economic balances. Now Putin has a different problem to deal with, and this problem is indeed seriously undermining Russia's defense and civilian labor capital. In a country of about 145 million people, most of them are in the military, so there are no workers and specialists left to work in production. So how is Russia trying to overcome the negative effects of the war? How long can the erasure of the labor market through military recruitment keep Russia afloat economically? If Putin fails to solve this problem, will Russia's defense and civilian production collapse, forcing the Kremlin leader to negotiate with Ukraine? For answers to all these questions and much more, the video begins. But first, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and give us a like to stay up to date with our content. The first problem is the disturbances in Russia's military production capacity. There are constant reports that the country needs to return to the old Soviet model of equipment. Currently, 80% of military equipment is being refurbished from storage facilities. Russian factories claim to deliver 1,500 main battle tanks, 3,000 armored fighting vehicles, and armored personnel carriers per year, and to produce more than 6 Iskander 9M723 missiles per month. Among the deliveries, 1,180 to 1,280 MBTs and 2,470 infantry fighting vehicles and armored personnel carriers come from warehouses. This means that Russia can sustain current attrition rates for another 2 to 3 years. Therefore, if Russia's current casualty rates in Ukraine continue, it is likely that by 2026, its ground forces equipment will be severely depleted. It is estimated that a total of 320, 220 main battle tanks and 530 armored personnel carriers will be produced annually. Moreover, the industry in Russia is largely prevented from producing newer generation weapon systems, such as the Su-57 fighter jet and the T-14 Armata main battle tank, and from rebuilding the damaged Black Sea naval fleet. All of this has reduced Russia's defense exports, and Russia's share of the global arms trade has fallen from 21% to almost 11%. Russia is struggling to fulfill contracts for large advanced weapon systems due to production problems. Moreover, exports of defense-related equipment are falling sharply as existing products are diverted to compensate for losses in the Russian army. Russia is struggling to fulfill contracts for large advanced weapon systems due to production problems. To solve these massive problems, shortly after Russia's large-scale invasion of Ukraine, Russian defense enterprises began offering inflated salaries to attract workers. With such strategies, the Russians have managed to bring in 520,000 new workers in the last year and a half, but shortages persist. The Ministry of Industry and Trade reported that by the end of 2023, about 75,000 specialists were needed in the defense sector, but 6 months later, this figure had more than doubled. Speaking at the second so-called National Congress of Personnel of the Defense Industrial Complex, Duma deputy and rector of the Pромsvyazbank Academy, Alexei Nechayev, said that Russia's defense enterprises currently need about 160,000 specialists. The shortage of the working class in Russia is around 400,000. In other words, the Russian industry is short of more than 500,000 workers, and a third of them are specialists. Alexei Nechayev described the lack of workers in the defense sector as an important problem. Pромsvyazbank, once a private bank that was nationalized after going bankrupt, warned Putin that Russia's workforce is slowly preparing for collapse as the main financial institution supporting defense procurement. Meanwhile, according to First Deputy Prime Minister Denis Manturov, whose portfolio includes industry, the defense sector's needs in 2025 are even greater. Denis Manturov predicts that Russia will need more than 250,000 specialists in 2025. This figure is almost a record. It is unlikely that Russia will be able to tackle this huge deficit while the occupation of Ukraine continues. Meanwhile, at a meeting with the heads of defense enterprises in May, Russian President Vladimir Putin noted that the production of weapons and equipment has increased significantly in the last 18 to 24 months, and pointed to other tasks. In addition to accelerating the implementation of new technology, the Russian leader spoke of expanding the repair of weapons and equipment and using the resources of small and medium-sized private enterprises. These statements emphasize the inadequacy of existing resources. Specialists are needed to use the resources of small and medium-sized businesses. But Putin did not show any way out in this regard. Putin has been calling on leading figures in Russia's defense sector to solve this problem. Officials echoed the president. Duma First Deputy Speaker Denis Kravchenko argues that the defense sector's labor shortage needs to be addressed urgently. Andrei Peregudov, head of the Military-Industrial Complex Department at the Ministry of Industry and Trade, believes that while the industry has managed to mobilize resources, much remains to be done, especially as the defense sector competes for personnel with the civilian sectors of the economy. A primary goal for Putin is to increase the number of workers and specialists working in Russia's defense sector. The civilian labor market is currently of little concern to the Russian leader. But what Putin does care about is Russia's military and defense progress, which is in deep decay. Russia's arms industry and export capabilities have long been a source of national pride, as Putin has said. Even after launching its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, Russia claimed to be able to meet growing domestic demand and continue exporting arms. By emphasizing the strength of Russia's military-industrial complex, state-sponsored propaganda sought to reassure both domestic and foreign public opinion of Russia's ability not only to continue its war effort in Ukraine, but also to further use arms sales for geopolitical influence. These statements were apparently designed to project confidence that Russia could outlast the West. At the same time, however, these messages were in striking contrast to the more pessimistic assessments seen in both international and Russian media. The Russian political and military leadership was constantly reporting on successes and new developments in import substitution programs that were improving existing military systems based on real-life combat experience. Throughout 2023 and early 2024, Russia's state-run arms exporter Rosoboronexport reported signing new contracts, citing steady international interest in Russian weapons and government approval of new systems for export. Reports of declining arms sales, such as the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute's 2023 forecast, have been erroneously dismissed, with officials claiming that not all sales were disclosed due to sanctions. Even admitted declines were portrayed as temporary setbacks, implying that they would be followed by another surge in exports after the war. A recent shakeup of the Russian military leadership, including the dismissal of Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and his deputies, and the subsequent arrest of Russian military leaders on corruption charges, has been the most significant sign of dissatisfaction with the status quo at the highest level. For the second year in a row, Russia's traditional Victory Day parade included only a limited show of military might. This signaled that the Russian leadership's military industry and arms exports were in decline. Putin was forced to find a way out of this predicament as he launched a voluntary conscription drive to fill the shortages in the Russian military, which has devastated the country's defense and civilian labor market. The way out, as we all know, was through North Korea. The deepening ties with North Korea, highlighted by Putin's unusual visit to Pyongyang, were seen as an effort to replenish Russia's depleted arsenal. Reports of Russia's growing reliance on old weapons suggested that it was struggling to meet even domestic demand. Some of the military systems used by Russia in Ukraine have been criticized for their poor performance. Russia's credibility has been questioned for failing to fulfill its promise to produce advanced military systems such as the Su-75 Checkmate or the MiG-35. Once a major arms exporter, the country is now reportedly trying to secretly buy back weapons from former customers and purchase second-hand Western machinery from China. Maintaining claims of successful import substitution is more difficult given the obvious challenges to implementing it in sectors such as civil aviation, where delivery schedules are repeatedly changed. For Russia, imports of military resources from North Korea and China have not only failed to fill the country's shortfall, but have also been a loss of prestige for Putin. Pessimistic assessments of Russia's arms industry began to appear even in the tightly controlled Russian media. Experts in Russia acknowledged the difficulties in maintaining relations with historical buyers of Russian arms. Moreover, Russia, which prioritizes domestic needs, was reportedly failing to deliver weapons to longtime customers such as India and Armenia. Some countries weighed the benefits of maintaining ties with Russia against the financial and reputational costs of continuing to do business there. This is why China and India have recently been shifting their arms purchases away from Russia. Moreover, China was perceived to be trying to improve its relations with the US, which was seen as a major setback for Russia-China cooperation. Despite the history of cooperation and presumed continued interest and loyalty, countries like Vietnam and Algeria were diversifying their suppliers and negotiating arms transfers with other countries like Turkey. Russia was struggling to salvage these relationships through significant diplomatic efforts, including a major visit by Putin to Vietnam. But it was becoming a hard sell. Similar trends can be observed even in the former Soviet republics, with Russian weapons accounting for more than 90% of total imports from 2019 to 2023. Kazakhstan is looking for new arms suppliers to diversify its purchases. Some Russian commentators have signaled the continuation of military technical cooperation, citing in particular Kazakhstan's decision not to purchase Rafale fighter jets from France as an example. Moreover, Russian media repeatedly accused Kazakh leaders of secretly supporting Ukraine and seeking international support to distance themselves from Russia. So experts in Russia were aware of these worrying trends. They warned of long-term consequences, including difficulties in efforts to win back lost customers. Experts were also critical of Russia's attempts to keep India and China as customers by using technology transfers, such as licensing local production of Russian-designed fighters or tanks. Some Russian publications argued that India and China would use Russian developments to develop their own military industries at Russia's expense. While the Kremlin government acknowledged the massive shortage of workers in military factories, experts in Russia also predicted that up to 40% of the country's research and engineering capabilities would be lost due to reduced revenues from arms sales. Overall, Russia is likely to perform better than expected in some critical areas, such as the production of much-needed artillery shells. But with NATO intensifying its support for Ukraine, Russia may not be able to sustain its material losses indefinitely. In this war of attrition, military production shortfalls could become a straw that breaks Russia's back. So how much of its budget is Russia spending on military production and labor capital to get out of this predicament? Due to a lack of transparent data, the exact scale of Russian defense spending is unclear, and it remains unclear how the defense industry functions. However, analysts have detailed that Russian defense spending was about $108 billion in 2023 and increased by 60% in 2024. This figure represents 7.5% of GDP and accounts for 33% of the federal budget. Moreover, this reflects a marked shift towards a war economy and a strategic priority given to strengthening military equipment. Putin has claimed that 520,000 new jobs have been created thanks to these investments in the defense industry, now totaling 3.5 million in 6,000 companies. The growth of the sector has directly affected the Russian economy, contributing to Russia's GDP growth rate of 3% to 3.5%. Russia's procurement capacities and supply capacities to Western defense industries should not be measured in dollar terms. This is because purchasing power parity shows that Russia's defense spending is much higher than the recorded $108 billion. This is important because Russia pays its defense industries in rubles and is also able to maintain economic advantages such as lower salaries for military personnel, industrial workers, commodity input costs, and economies of scale and scope. Therefore, when comparing our Western and Russian defense procurement and related industries, it can be argued that not all expenditures are equal. On the other hand, the reverse is the case. This economic momentum faces long-term instability, including concerns about the viability of the Russian labor force, 21% interest rates, and major distortions in public finances. Moreover, the disproportionate economic impact of spending on the defense industry is causing wider problems for the civilian sectors due to higher salary compensation and rising inflation. Nevertheless, Russia's economy and financial stability are essentially deteriorating. Against this deterioration, Putin is using the country's energy resources as leverage. As a global supplier of energy and commodities, Russia is using oil revenues to offset the distortions caused by its strategic position and the increase in economic and domestic consumption and war resources. If the price of Russian Urals crude remains above $60 per barrel, the Russian Sovereign Wealth Fund will continue to provide a financial safety net for the federal finances. This is not certain due to the tightening of sanctions and the reduction of the NWF from $112 billion in February 2022 to $55 billion in February 2024. However, with Urals crude currently trading at $78 per barrel, the Russian state and economic trade diversification in the medium term will be able to replenish the NWF. The U.S. Treasury Department claims that the oil price cap has resulted in a 40% revenue reduction for the Russian state between January and September 2023. Due to the oil price cap, Russian Urals oil witnessed a discount of $12 to $13 per barrel of crude oil. Despite this, Russia is reportedly still trading oil above the price cap and using shadow fleet to transport its oil. The Russian defense and land sector, which has adopted the shadow fleet attitude, and its impact on the economy has been described by Richard Connolly of RUSI as the Kalashnikov economy. This is because the sector is increasingly focused on mass production of more durable, but less sophisticated weapons. Moreover, the sector is prioritizing the refurbishment of warehoused and obsolete equipment over modern defense production lines. The Kalashnikov economy is marked by the need to collect 25 years of durable parts and bulk electronic components, which are almost impossible to regulate through the international sanctions regime. The Russian Ministry of Defense and analysts believe that with this system of economy, Russia's strategic advantage lies in the mass production of ammunition. The sector reportedly produces and imports between 2.5 and 5 million 152mm, and 122mm shells annually. While there have been reports that the shells are of poor quality and the cost is exaggerated, shared NATO intelligence estimates suggest that Russia is producing far more artillery ammunition than Western countries are able to produce and supply to Ukraine. Russia's advantage in artillery ammunition production stems from existing structural advantages. These include Russia's position as a major arms exporter before February 2022, which gave it the position of a major arms producer and a unique breadth of production capacity. However, since the annexation of Crimea in 2014, munitions production has been inefficient and unregulated. This is due to the sanctions imposed by the West on the Russian economy and defense industry after the annexation, as well as overinvestment between 2000 and 2012. Thus, Russia's overcapacity has resulted in the ability to divert defense factory production to lower quality defense production, including a large increase in the production of artillery shells. Moreover, this has also been supported by the redeployment of civilian industries, which have been mothballed since 2012 due to Russia's failed modernization efforts and foreign companies leaving Russia. And this in turn led to the evacuation of existing facilities. On the other hand, sanctions have played an important role in shaping the Russian defense industry by impeding the import of critical inputs into the construction of defense equipment, machine tools, microchips, semiconductors. Western sanctions have put a further dent in Russia's crumbling military production. Even the shipments of oil and other energy resources by Russia's shadow fleet were not enough to cover up the quality problems in military production caused by the Kalashnikov economy and the severe effects of the sanctions. In short, the shortage of soldiers in the Russian army has crippled Russia's economy as the Kremlin has recruited workers and specialists from both the defense and civilian labor markets to serve as military personnel. The people provided to the military have left a deep wound in the Russian defense industry and private sectors. Russian military production, already of poor quality, has not recovered from the old Soviet process due to shortcomings. Putin cannot escape this dilemma in any way. Although the Russian leader has turned to North Korea for additional troops and military resources, a single ally is not enough for Putin. This situation is likely to affect Putin even more severely in the future, as Russia's defense civilian production will collapse and military losses will increase despite additional supplies in the army. Thank you for choosing us.